Good morning. We are over halfway there. And I think it's about to start getting busy. All right, we're going to set the calendar for today and tomorrow. So we've got quite a few bills we've got to consider, and we've got a few folks who want to talk to us about their bills. So, Chairman Corbett, you want to lead off? Well, one of you go up there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you the first bill that I have is on modified structured rule, 8 down, House Bill 131. Basically, what we're doing with this bill is taking the aquarium bill and moving it from just a plain revenue sharing tag to a conservation tag, and this just enables them to the aquarium to have a when they divide up the manufacturing fee initially and also the renewal fee, they'll get a larger part of the fee when they do that.
How much?
On the manufacturing fee, as it is right now, a $25 manufacturing fee, the state gets 24, the county gets 1. The change would be the state will get 5, the aquarium 19, and the county 1. The renewal fee right now is $35 renewal fee, 25 to the state and 10 to the aquarium. Under the change, it will move it to a $25 renewal fee, which the state gets 5 and the aquarium 20.
Why?
Why? Okay. The mission of the aquarium, their collaborative conservation and research efforts, they spend $2.1 million in research and conservation is budgeted this year. They allowed over 1,040,000 students to go through. They got a program where it highlights a sponsorship, education, admissions, where they get in free if you're a Tier 1 or Tier 2 county. So they do a lot of free admission for kids from Tier 1, Tier 2 counties, plus they do a lot of conservation work as well.
Any other questions? Hawkins.
Who owns the Georgia Aquarium? Is this a private enterprise?
I'm not sure.
Be nice to know. Yeah, thank you.
You have no other questions? Got one? Okay, Chairman Cooper.
I'm not sure who owns the aquarium, but Mr. Marcus has had a great deal to do with it. But I will also say, if you look across our state, like what he has given to Grady Hospital, I wouldn't begrudge him any kind of money, because their brain center, their new emergency room, he spreads his wealth around. So if he gets anything from the aquarium, it's well deserved and usually goes out to benefit our city and state.
No more questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have another bill on here, if I may ask.
Oh, do we have a question? Okay.
Okay, under modified structured rule as well, 3 up from the bottom, House Bill 213, the Georgia Hemp Farming Act. With the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, it removed industrial hemp from being a Schedule I narcotic. So now it allows the states to apply to the USDA for a permit to be able to grow it legally in the state. And that's what we're attempting to do with this bill, to set up in law, rules and guidelines for the Department of Ag, the processors and the growers to follow, and to be able to apply for procedures to be able to grow the industrial hemp here in Georgia.
You have no questions? Oh, yeah, we got one. Whip Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Corbett, could you explain to us a little bit about how y'all set up the licenses that would be available for the cultivation of the hemp and why y'all reached that kind of consensus there?
Okay, we started out, we originally talked about doing three permits, and we're going to permit the processor. And then let the processor then contract with the grower to grow it. We're trying to do it in a slow and measured way because hemp has not been grown here in Georgia since, I think, back in the 40s legally. So.
Don't tell on yourself now.
Anyway, so we're trying to do it in a slow and measured way to be able to. It's going to be a learning curve for the Department of Ag, the grower, and the processor to grow this. So we're going to start out with a limited number of processors, letting them contract with the farmers. That way, that you're not going out and planting, way more acres than you got use for.
So let me just make sure I understand. 3 people hold a license
Well,
to process.
we changed that to 12 in
To 12.
in the process.
And then those 12 processors, though, can contract with an unlimited number of growers
They've got to contract with a minimum of 5.
Okay.
But they can contract with as many as they want, but a minimum of 5. And most of these processors, ones you talk to, they're talking about possibly up to 200 acres. So with 200 acres, if you contract with 5, that'd be 40 acres apiece. Or if you 10, it'd be 20.
Thank you. Just, I know this does have some value to our agricultural community. I want to make sure as many people can take the benefit of it as possible.
And that is right. And it's set up to qualify. You have to be a qualified farmer and have to meet the same criteria to be able to apply for a gate card, to be able to apply for the permit.
Thank you.
Chairman Powell.
Yes, sir. I'm just sort of odds about this putting a limit on folks, because in commercial hemp, there's nothing in commercial hemp that's dangerous. You can't get high off of it or anything else. Wasn't it it got wrapped up into the same stuff with marijuana years ago?
Well, it did, but in the definition of industrial hemp, it has to have 0.3 THC, 0.3% or less. So if it gets over 0.3, that's when it becomes illegal. So that's the guideline. We got to make sure we can stay below that 0.3, and the University of Georgia and other universities think they can actually develop a seed that has no THC. So hopefully in the first few years we'll be able to that point where you can have a seed that has no THC. So it's got minimal.
So the reason for limiting the licensees on this would be they're afraid they're going to mix the good stuff in with the normal stuff?
No, and that's the other. You don't want to mix it together because it'll cross-pollinate, and it'll cause your industrial hemp to be higher than it should, or it would cause, if somebody's trying to do it illegally, it would make what they're trying to grow be way less. So you don't want to mix the two together.
Representative Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the university system colleges, will they be allowed to just do the research and experiment, or will they be allowed to be growers as well? No,
they'll just be doing the research on the new varieties and seeds and test and see how it will grow in our climate, our soils, different weather conditions is what the universities will be doing.
Representative Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentleman, yield.
I yield.
I have 2 quick questions for you. Number one, what is the cost of the processing of if someone wanted to get a license to process, what would that cost be?
For the processor, we call that the permit for the processor.
Yeah,
right now it's set at $100,000 for the first year for the fee, and then it drops to $25,000 a year after that. And as long as they don't violate any of the rules that's set up by the Department of Ag, and then our rules that we set up in law, they can continue to receive that on as long as they want it for the $25,000 a year after that.
Thank you. And gentlemen, yield for one more question.
Yes.
Will those licenses or the processing license be demographically spread out throughout Georgia, or will it be places where we have a certain amount in South Georgia, a certain amount in Middle Georgia, a certain amount in North Georgia, or is it just the market will just demand?
There's no requirement for that. The only thing in there, if you have more than 12 people apply, then it'll go to a certain criteria, financial ability, experience, and then whatever other criteria that the Department of Ag would like to set up that they have to meet. If there's more than 12 apply.
Thank you.
Chairman Setzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Corbett, isn't it true that you know, the 0.3% THC is the max in this industrial hemp? Isn't it true that if you go back to 1950, 1940, that the plant we refer to now as marijuana, the naturally occurring THC content was about 0.3% THC?
I believe you know what you speak, but the plant's been bred to the 18 to 25% THC.
So it's been bred up to be sort of this super THC plant today, but in essence, industrial hemp is what marijuana would have been in 1940, 1930. This is, in essence, that same THC level.
I can't speak to that. I wasn't alive in 1940, but.
I want people to be clear about what we're doing. I mean, it's a policy question for every member to decide, but marijuana that was naturally occurring in nature, that became more commonly used through the early part of the last century, the natural occurring THC content is exactly what this industrial hemp is. So when you think about industrial hemp, this is basically a marijuana plant before marijuana was bred to yield super high THC content. I just want to be clear about that.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions. And as you can see, there's a lot of interest in this. I don't know in what direction. But my first question is, are there sufficient, or are the distributors based to where the entire state will have access? That's first. There's not going to be a part of the state left off, is there? That's first. Secondly, have you gotten any feedback from what law enforcement thinks about this?
Yes, we've had the Sheriff's Association. I'm going to answer the second one first, and then we get to the first one. But anyway, the Sheriff's Association and GBI have been involved with this. GBI was in our subcommittee meeting the other day. We made some changes that they requested, and they're good with it. And the Sheriff's Association have been with us, and they're not opposing it. They wanted to wait and see what the final version was, so they're not against the bill. As far as how it's going to be distributed throughout the state, that will be up to the individual processors as it gets those licenses or permits.
You have no other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your favorable consideration.
Chairman Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'll see the bill that I'm presenting to you, HB 228, is on the back of your page there at the top. Very simply, this is a measure that would move the marriage age for the state of Georgia from 16 to 17. It does still allow for an emancipation process for that determination to be made, and addresses all the emancipation language in our code section so that it's reformed to reflect the change from 16 to 17. Happy to take any questions.
Whip Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Welch, I like your bill, certainly understand the wisdom behind it. The question I had is in section 1.6 around line 161, where we talk about recognizing what I would consider the young marriages that take place in other states. Is it your belief we have to recognize those in Georgia, or could we not recognize those as well?
No, it would not apply to, we would not be recognizing those from other states. So it would not provide for, in this provision here, if I'm on the same page with you, you're at lines 161, or 161, is that right?
Yeah, 161, the way I read it was that all that we have in this code section would not apply if someone at 16 got married over in Alabama and then moved to Georgia. We would then still recognize their marriage. Is that correct?
No, it would not. The solemnization process would not be recognized if it was married in another state that did not have the same.
Okay, thank you.
And what we're trying to address here, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is we're trying to address the marriage at a younger age of 16 also greatly impedes typically the female in her ability to make adult decisions later on in life. There's significant cervical cancer risks. There are significant abusive situations that arise. And what we've seen is that oftentimes that those children are manipulated for an exploited purpose and not for the well-being of the love between the two individuals. So this measure would greatly curtail that and prevent those kinds of marriages in the state of Georgia. This has been enacted by Virginia in 16, Texas in 17, and Kentucky last year.
Mr. Hawkins.
So let me get this right. If a young girl gets pregnant at 15, 16, she cannot marry the willing father?
That's correct. At 15, she cannot marry now in the state of Georgia. And 16, she can presently,
Right.
but would not be able to under this bill.
And so we're doing this for what reason?
Well, oftentimes the marriage that results is exploitive. There's a situation where there is an overage, significantly overage male involved that is coercive in nature. The relationship is oftentimes abusive. By moving it to 17, we'd still have the same parameters that we have. We actually have enhanced parameters to guard against an abusive relationship or coercive relationship that may exist between the adult male and the female, the minor female.
You can still marry your cousin?
Not here. I can't speak to that. The bill doesn't speak to that.
Did you ask him if he could marry his cousin, or was he still married to his cousin? You have no other questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Chairman McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 208, fourth one from the bottom on the front page. This is the second time I was asking for it. It helps all the MEAG cities and Crisp County, and especially Camilla. It allows them to enter into a longer-term contract. It's just changing 10 years to 20 years on the contract, and that was the 10 years were set years ago. And it's really just updating and giving MEAG cities opportunity to do some things that they don't have the opportunity to do now. Georgia Power, EMCs, everybody's okay with it.
You have no questions.
Can I ask for one more, please, sir? On the back page, House Bill 322, the last one above, structured. We did a bill last year, and we put the wrong number in it. All this does is change where counties and school boards and cities have to advertise on the Georgia Procurement Registry. We upping it from 10,000 to 100,000, which is what we should have done last year. This was an old bill that we pulled numbers out of and forgot to change. And everybody's good with it too.
Chairman Setzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman McCall, forgive me for, I did have a question about 208. I wanted to just ask, just to be clear, so this is this deals with city utilities and kind of what your...
Mostly the electric cities of Georgia. I think it's 40 or so of them, and then Crisp County has its own electric authority, so it would deal with it. And what it does is allow those to enter into contracts, say for a solar project, which is the easiest example I can give you. And I mean, narrow it down. Walmart is trying to go all green, so if a city wants to get a Walmart and they want to work toward the green energy for Walmart, then 10 years is not a long enough term of a contract to enter into a solar panel project to be able to lure a Walmart.
Does this deal only with renewable projects, or does this deal with other projects as well?
It's anything, but that's just an example, easy example that my little pea brain can figure out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No more questions.
Thanks, sir.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I have two bills under the modified open. The first one is HB 42, which is the bill that would remove the ability to to suspend a professional license if somebody gets behind on their student loans.
You have no question.
And then HB 69 is the second one under modified open rule. This is the special needs scholarship bill that passed last year out of the House as HB 759, 171 to 0. It would allow for a student that obtains eligibility for the special needs scholarship to keep that eligibility moving forward.
You have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Floor Leader Lott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you today HB 321. It is on the back page, last bill listed. It extends the sunset provision of the hospital Medicaid financing program, hospital provider payment, that contributes nearly $1 billion towards Medicaid in this state for an additional 5-year period, changes the date from 2020 to 2025. It renews the authority of DCH to continue administering the program.
You have no questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Donahue.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you the fifth from the bottom on the front page, HB 193. This basically is incentives for savings in the banking industry. 40% of all Americans cannot cover a $40 or $400 problem if it comes up before you, if your car breaks down or if you had to replace a appliance. 58% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings, and 83% of Americans retire at poverty level. Something that we really don't think about. We have a thing called the rainy day fund here where we put money away for a rainy day. And what we're trying to do is encourage an incentive for you to put money in a savings account. Each bank, each credit union is good with this, but it gives them the authority to make and set their own rules. And by their own rules mean that they can give away a prize without you investing or losing any part of your investment, just to encourage you to start savings. That's basically all this bill does, sir.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I missed it along the way, but what happened to the Christmas Savings Club that every bank had one time? And my grandmother got a couple of toasters. I don't know what we needed 2 toasters for.
But you're exactly right, sir. And I remember my grandmother did the same, and they gave me a little book that they stamped when I went and put my $5 in or my $10 in. And what's happened is we're not doing that anymore. And that's why most of this country is pretty much suffering, because they do not have a dollar to live in. But we're not looking at giving a toaster. Basically, each bank or each credit union will take the opportunity for that prize. If you put $25 into a savings account, what they will do is they will put your name into a raffle. That raffle is pretty much where if you do it each week, your name goes in each week. Then what happens is they will draw that out by their standards, that bank or that credit union, that each one will set their own bylaws to draw out. It might be 4 times a year. They might choose to give $100. They might choose to give $1,000.
Saved a lot of toasters.
Yes, sir. I have 4.
Tell me how we get around the constitutional prohibition against lotteries except for nonprofit organizations.
You know, Mr. Chairman, one of the things there is basically most of your schemes have some type of investment that you're going to lose. This here basically, all we're doing is we're coming forward just saying if you have the incentive to save and you have a chance to win some money. And with the constitutional part, you know, I couldn't tell you exactly how to get around it. I just know that everything we've looked at, that there is a suspicion that we might be charging a fee, or there's a suspicion that this might try to take advantage of the saver, which it doesn't. In all the United States, we can do this. Each state has to make it, I think, pretty much their own.
Well, looking at the bill, there is, I understand that the distinction in the Constitution is whether you pay money for the raffle. there's nothing in this bill that prohibits a credit union or bank from charging for the raffle, so it might be that we need to put that prohibition in there to make sure that it can pass constitutional muster.
Yes, sir.
Whip Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on your comments there and the bill author's willingness to try and work on this still some, I would make the motion that we recommit this to the Banks and Banking Committee for the purpose of adding in the language you just spoke about.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any objection? There's no objection. It's recommitted to committee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Emery, we'll get that fixed. Representative Gaines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I again bring before you House Bill 217. It's the second to last bill on the first page. This is a bill that did pass the House 169-1 last year and also made it unanimously through the Senate, but an unrelated measure got added to the bill and it wasn't able to get through the whole process. But it would enable syringe services programs in Georgia. Happy to answer any questions.
You have no questions.
Thank you.
Have you been here before?
No, sir. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm bringing before House Bill 319, which basically is the firefighters' pension fund and life insurance.
Where's it located?
It's on the first page, number 4.
Okay.
Basically, if no one has a beneficiary designated, the funds would go to the estate of that said employee.
Representative Al Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this your first bill before the Rules Committee?
Yes, sir, it is.
Just wanted to inform you that there had been a complaint that you've missed the last 2 Williams caucus meetings. You need to do better.
Well, I'm sorry, we'll have to reconvene.
Thank you, sir.
I'm disappointed you have no other questions.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Belton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm bringing before you House Bill 26 on the modified structured rule, the first one. Do appreciate the committee's patience with this bill, especially appreciate Chairman Cooper, who worked with me to make sure this bill is exactly right. Again, this is a psychology compact. Georgia belongs to 35 different compacts. It passed unanimously last year. It's Joyce Chandler's bill. It's one of the yellow items and the green, yellow, red bills that the military is requesting. I have a letter from the military. I have a letter from the Georgia State Psychology Compact requesting this bill. Increases consumer protections, it protects our sovereignties, and increases standards. Ask for any questions.
You have no questions.
Thank you. I ask for your favorable consideration.
Floor Leader LaRicchia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. This is the very last one on the front page under modified structured rule. Very simple move of a sunset for Joshua's Law. Most of you are familiar with Joshua's Law, and it sunsets on June the 30th of this year, and we just extend that sunset out to 2022.
Chairman Powell.
Gentlemen, under the Joshua's Law, what is the surcharge on a fine under this law? Is it
1.5%.
So it did not, this
No,
wasn't
sir.
raising it?
No, sir, we didn't talk about that at all. We just wanted to extend that sunset.
Thank you.
Chairman Benton.
Would this bill be this bill be a good example of funds that have been collected and haven't been appropriated like they're supposed to be?
There was some concern about that in the past. I think that was corrected, and the testimonies that we've heard is that those funds are being well used in the right way.
Okay.
The original fine add-on on that was like 5%, and it's been reduced to match the amount of funds appropriated. So it's okay. Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, members. Efstration, Chairman Efstration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 70 is the fifth down under modified structure rule, first page, House Bill 70. This bill is consistent with the Uniform Guardianship Act that was passed a few years ago. There were some issues with existing Georgia law and making sure that it connected with what the legislature passed in '05, and so this corrects those issues. Would ask for your favorable consideration.
Are there questions? Yeah, you have no questions.
Thank you.
Chairman Benton.
Mr. Chair, Bill 196 is the third one down on modified open rule. Require members of the trust for a retirement system excluding GMA, ACCG, teachers retirement, and employee retirement to go through education that matches their fiduciary responsibility.
All right, let me ask you a question or two about that. You excluded ACCG and GMA because they're already providing training, is that correct? How is that different from, say, for instance, the state bar requires lawyers to do continuing education? And how would that be different than a law firm that goes to the state bar and say, we train our lawyers, so exclude us from the process? It's still required. Now, what they may be doing internally may satisfy the requirement, but it's still required under the process. And I don't see that this is any different.
Okay. If
Whip Kelly.
Do you want me to make a motion to send it back and fix that?
Whip Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going along with what Chairman Benton and your conversation, I guess we could make a motion to recommit it back to his committee so that he could add those back in, as y'all just discussed.
Is there a second? Any objection? Hearing none, it's recommitted to committee. Have you got another bill?
I had another one that was on the blue sheet Thursday, but it's not on the blue sheet today.
Okay. Chairman Martin.
Directed to Chairman Powell, our Rules Chairman, is it your intent to move all of the exclusions? I also have a pause with the teachers' retirement system being removed from that. They manage some of the, if not the largest retirement fund in our state. I'm curious as to why they would be not subject to training.
If we are going to require public systems to be trained, I think we ought to require public systems to be trained.
Yes, sir. So remove all the exclusions.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Representative Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring your attention to House Bill 66. It simply allows those entities that have specialty license plates for automobiles to be allowed to get them for motorcycles as well.
All right, so whatever's available for cars would be available for motorcycles.
Yes.
Questions? Whip Kelly.
I guess my question is, do you know how many of these specialty license plates currently exist? And so, I mean, essentially we would be doubling every one of them. So do you know how many that would go to?
I wouldn't say that you would double every one of them because not all are going to want specialty license plates for motorcycles. The entity that was asking for this is a fraternity. My sorority has a specialty license tag. We won't be asking for that for motorcycles. So, so it's not necessarily a one-for-one because not all entities that have the specialty license plates are going to want them for motorcycles. The
So are we
the
limiting it
requirements.
just to ask some, if they could ask for it to be made in a specialty motorcycle, or are we saying that all the ones that are currently existing would be eligible if someone were to come and request? Because those are two different things.
They will be eligible, but they would still have to request and meet the requirements that the Department of Revenue establishes. So we won't just be making one motorcycle tag if one wants one.
Okay.
The reason it was for all entities as opposed to the entity that asked for this was so that once motorcycle specialty tags are out there, we wouldn't have to come back and come back and come back and authorize each one individually. And that's why it would make all of them eligible, but they would still have to go through a process.
Thank you.
Dean.
I'm a member of that fraternity that's requesting the tag for motorcycles. I don't have a motorcycle, but I thought about getting one. I know y'all will be hard pressed to see me own one, but I am considering it. But I did go to the meeting and sit in on the request, and on a serious note, the gentleman that requested Representative Hughley to carry this bill, and I signed it, was that after the tag bill was presented, a lot of members came forward and said they'd like to do a motorcycle tag. And the gentleman's from Columbus and a great community leader, so we decided to join in that effort. They told us that because of the continuity aspect of it, it would take time for Revenue Department and Motor Services Division to come together to work this out. So it's a time situation, but I think it would be something that's worthy of consideration.
Chairman Smith.
Dean, does Mercedes make a motorcycle?
No, I don't think they make them now. But I'm gonna get me a Harley.
Mr. Bodie. I have an understanding that the prosecutorial community supports your bill. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Okay. Are there questions? You have no questions. Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the second page in the modified structured, House Bill 316, Mr. Chairman, this is a bill which updates several portions of our election law in the state of Georgia. In committee, before committee, and we accepted several proposals from our friends on the other side of the aisle. One of the portions of the bill is actually a bill dropped by a Democrat dealing with absentee ballots and closing of precincts and putting time limits on that. Besides those updates to election law, the other main part of the bill deals with a process of purchasing new voting machines for the state of Georgia. It would set in motion an RFP process that would be carried out by our Secretary of State to move us to a form of voting machines referred to commonly as a ballot marking device. With Pennsylvania just recently coming out in favor of this type of voting system, I think now a majority of the states either use this or have jurisdictions which do use it. It basically consists of a voter going into the voting booth or voting office, punching their selections into a touchscreen, which they are used to doing and have done now for about 17 years. And then a paper ballot is printed with those choices. They get a chance to review that paper ballot, and if it's right, then they vote it through a scanner, and they've cast their ballot. Very important to that process in order to strengthen our citizens' confidence in the voting system is, for the first time in Georgia, we will begin an audit process with this new paper trail, where you can now go back and look at individual precincts and counties and recount them to make sure that the tabulations were correct. So I'd be asking for that, Mr. Chairman, and also at the appropriate time, I would mention a proposal for debate on the floor.
I didn't hear the last part.
At the appropriate time, I would mention a proposal for how we handle debate on the floor as far as divvying up time and so forth.
Are there questions? Representative Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Fleming, can you explain to me why we are going from one voting device per 200 to one per 250, considering that this new process has an extra step? So I failed to see how it would go faster.
Yes, ma'am. The answer to that question is that the 250 per voter ratio would equal what we currently are using in the state. In other words, that's the ratio that's currently out there. Secondly, our current DRE system of voting, as they're referred to, cannot be used in early voting and on election day because the machine actually tallies the votes and holds them. The new system would move to a paper ballot, which would actually be the ballot, and therefore the number of machines with that count could be used in early voting and election day. So by moving that number to 250, we would actually be reflective of what's currently in the state, and we would also actually increase the number of voting machines available on election day rather than decrease them. Also, of course, as has happened with counties, although the state under this proposal would be making a significant investment in doing the upfront purchases, nothing stops the counties from purchasing more of the machines if they choose to. My county, for example, is a fast-growing county, and although the state made the initial purchase for us back in 2002 of the current machines, they have more than doubled their cadre of machines.
Leader Trammell. Wait a sec.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the gentleman, isn't it true we had several days of testimony where experts and citizens expressed concern about the notion of using ballot marking devices as opposed to hand-marked paper ballots?
Not only is that true, Mr. Leader, but there was also, I would say, months of study and with a commission that met specially last year and the early part of this year that ultimately recommended the type of machine we're referring to go to.
Mr. Chairman, one other question, if I might. Isn't it also true that House Bill 316 in its present form would not exclude the use of coding or barcodes that would be read as the actual, by the scanner, as the actual mark for the vote as opposed to a human readable mark, and that we could, if we wanted to, put language in the bill that would say that the scanners actually read the mark, the human readable mark that voters intend for the candidate of her or his choice, as opposed to reading something that cannot be read like a barcode without the assistance of an external device. Isn't that true?
The issue that the minority leader raises goes to the idea there are some 7, 8, or 9 different vendors that supply the various states in the union with these type voting machines. Some of those vendors offer systems that, to put it generally speaking, read the actual name. If you voted for Representative Matt Hatchett or Carla Drenner, you would actually have the name read off the scanning device, read the name printed on the ballot. Some of those vendors offer, of course, that name that you can see it to verify that you voted, but there's also a barcode at the bottom like you would see in a grocery store, and that barcode, that computer language, contains Carla Drenner or Matt Hatchett, for example. Both of those type systems are offered by the multiple vendors out there. The concern with making the legislation so specific that we dictated to the Secretary of State through the RFP process exactly what kind of machine, given those two options, they would have to purchase, is that we may make this a sole source contract by legislation. In other words, we would be tying ourselves possibly to only one vendor that produces that type of technology which you would be referring to. I don't think that is wise that we ever make anything a sole source contract. What usually happens when one vendor knows that they're the only ones that can supply your purchase, somehow the price usually goes way up. It also eliminates competition by the other vendors and during the RFP selection.
Chairman Martin.
Chairman Fleming, quick question. I've heard and gotten information about a hand-marked paper ballot where people bubble it in, and that would be scanned, and people would see a bubble next to Barry Fleming, and therefore they feel good that when it's counted, their bubbled-in thing would vote for Barry Fleming. I don't know where the chairman is. Oh, I'm right down the row here. I was just looking at it. Isn't it true that on that, even if you see that you're bubbled in next to the name you wish, that a computer program has to have an XY coordinate to read what bubble it is, and the fact that you bubbled in something next to the name you wanted, if the hardware is misprogrammed, it too can count the wrong person. And isn't it true that what we're trying to get at here is whatever is counted is on a paper ballot, and if there's a question, one can take the count that the computer has and put it next to the paper that's written there, and that can be checked. Isn't it true that what we're offering in 316 gives vendors the opportunity to offer us just that, the absolute opportunity to check what was voted for and placed on the ballot, and that the computer read can be looked at side by side with a human later on to make sure they're the same? Isn't that true regardless of how the ballot is marked?
I believe the gentleman's comment, as I understand them, is correct, and there's another very important part that follows up exactly what you're talking about, that being that the voter themselves gets to verify who they voted for by seeing it printed for them, and that becomes their ballot. But there's also an audit process, and the reason I emphasize that is because that goes to the issue of the ballots that were counted, were they counted correctly? As all of us are aware, whether it be through CPA firms or their businesses or local governments, the audit process goes back to verify what has happened previously. Another point that the gentleman raises is very important. No matter which of the two systems that are being banted around that we may go with, whether it be marking a ballot paper with a pencil or marking it through a printer that doesn't lead to problems with voter intent, both of those ballots are going to be read by a computer scanner. And a computer scanner doesn't work like our eyes and our brains. We read a written language. It reads marks on a paper with coordinates of where that mark should be and what it means. So I believe the gentleman makes a good point, and I agree with him.
Representative Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to bring your attention to Section 1, line 43, as you describe the electronic ballot marking device. If you go down to line 44, there's a statement that says, may integrate components such as ballot, scanner, printer, touchscreen, etc. As you describe the way in which a voter would interface with the printed version of the vote cast, this line basically says that there's an opportunity, if we have certain machines, that vote would never be printed, that it could actually be cast, and then the machine could just tabulate that vote without ever having to print that vote so someone could verify it. And there are these express machines that are currently on the market with ESS that certainly do that. And so you wouldn't have this verifiable way in which a person can look at the printed ballot, see that they marked the right thing, and then have their vote cast. They can actually completely integrate that within one system and never get the printed ballot. How do you address that if we have this integrated component system with the way in which you describe a voter would actually interface with these ballots?
Well, I appreciate the gentleman's question. I'm going to do my best to understand it. I disagree with your description of the language and what it does. The bill clearly states that a ballot marking device would be used. It resulted on a paper ballot that the voter themselves could look at and see the name on there. Now, there are several places in the bill which did cause some confusion in committee, but I think we're able to straighten that out. If we move to a ballot marking device, the goal would be for the 2020 elections. We all know that there are going to have to be elections in the year 2019, this year. Special elections, city elections, splost elections through the various jurisdictions. These new voting machines are going to have to be integrated into our system, so we will keep using the DREs or the current machines for a period of time. So the bill has language which allows those DREs to exist as we move through this process. I hope that is responsive to the gentleman's question.
All right, we are not going to debate this bill today. This is purely for purposes of asking questions about the bill. So we'll move on so that we can get to session soon. Terry Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm still trying to get past Dean Myrie on a Harley. Thank you. I'd like to present HB 221, please. Basically what this bill does is it allows the Congress Center to extend their bonding capacity from $400 million to $500 million. Came through the Ways and Means, both subcommittee and committee. It's a bill that we passed in 2017 for $400 million, and we're just raising it another $100 million to $500 million to take care of some construction costs for a new hotel. The bill, there is no fallback at all on the state. There's no liability from the state, and also the revenue from the hotel will pay the indebtedness.
Are there questions? You have no questions. Chairman Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of Chairman Watson, I'd like to ask for House Bill 105. This would provide that if and when our federal government acts and makes disaster relief payments available to those impacted by Hurricane Michael, that those payments would be exempt from state income tax.
You have no questions. Mr. Williamson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here to ask for House Bill 185, the annual housekeeping bill for the Department of Finance. All interested parties are in agreement.
You have no questions. Chairman Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the second page, 5 down, I'd like to ask for House Bill 290. This is a third in our HIV bills, trying to get a handle on our high infection rate of HIV across our state. This would do a pilot project to test the new PEP type program, which helps keep viral loads down and makes people unable to pass on HIV. The medication would be paid for by the drug company, and the estimated cost is somewhere between it's $50,000 for the first year, and then over a 3-year period, somewhere between $200,000 and $300,000, depending on how many people stay on the program.
You have no questions. Chairman Carson. Did I promote you?
I think you did.
Vice Chairman Carson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I bring before you House Bill 284, and all this really does is changes the magistrate court from a partisan office to a nonpartisan office in Cobb County.
You have no questions.
And then,
Go ahead.
If I may, House Bill 285, this does the same thing for probate judge of Cobb County, both judicial positions providing for nonpartisan elections.
You have no questions. Representative Drenner.
My light just won't go off. I don't have a question. I had a question way back, but it won't go off.
Okay. All right, anybody else? All right, let's set the calendar for today. HB 26. It's on. HB 70. It's on. HB 208. It's on. HB 217.
Moved.
It's on. HB 226.
Moved.
It's on. HB 105.
Moved.
It's on. HB 221. It's on. All right, that's the calendar for today. Now we're setting the calendar for tomorrow. HB 319.
Moved.
It's on. HB 185.
Moved.
It's on. HB 228.
Moved.
It's on. HB 284. It's on. HB 285. It's on. HB 316. All right, there is a move, there is an objection. We'll call for a hand vote. All in favor of putting it on the calendar, raise your hand. Opposed? Ayes, carry it. All right, Chairman Hatchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pursuant to Rule 33.3, I move that we limit debate on House Bill 316 to 1 hour, time to be apportioned by the Speaker, and the 1 hour not inclusive of the time for the Chairman's reports.
Okay. And minority report. All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there objection? Okay, there is objection. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. Opposed? It carries. And that's Tuesday's calendar. We are adjourned.
He didn't put minority report on here. I'll let you know I didn't.